Alright, what's going on everyone? And welcome to the series in which I introduce you to all the most powerful competitive decks in the modern format. The goal here isn't to give you an exact deck list as those change constantly, but rather to give you a brief overview of how the deck works so you can be prepared if you're new to Modern, if you're thinking about getting into Modern, or if you're just curious about what decks are being played in the format. So today we're looking at Dredge, a deck named after the Dredge mechanic as seen on cards like Stinkweed Imp, Golgari Thug, and Life from the Loam. Don't worry about the text on these cards, it's irrelevant for now. All that matters is the Dredge keyword. So Dredge will let you skip your draw and instead put cards from the top of your library into your graveyard. You also get the card back. So if you have Stinkweed Imp in your graveyard, instead of drawing for your turn, you can skip that, don't draw, get Stinkweed Imp back, and then put 5 cards into your graveyard. So what this deck is trying to do is dump its entire deck into its graveyard as quickly as possible, and one of the best ways to do this is with Cathartic Reunion. So the reason this card is so powerful is the order in which you do these things. You discard cards first and then you draw afterwards. So let's say you have an Imp and a Thug in your hand when you cast Cathartic Reunion. You can discard the 2 Dredge cards, you can discard the 2 creatures first, and then you draw, and when you go to draw, you can start dredging. Instead of drawing your first card, you dredge the Imp, you get it back in your hand, and you put 5 cards in your graveyard. Then you go to draw your second card, you dredge 4 more cards, that's 9 cards, and this is a Dredge deck. There's a lot of Dredge cards in the deck, so very likely, it's very possible that you dredged into at least one more Dredger in that 9 cards, and then when you go to draw your third card, you can dredge again, potentially putting, upwards of like 10 to 15 cards in your graveyard on turn 2. And from there, the deck just goes off. It's literally turn 2 just trying to get this engine going where it tries to basically flip its entire deck into its graveyard and then play the deck from the graveyard. It doesn't look to cast that many cards, it's just trying to operate from the graveyard. So to help with this, it also plays Shriekhorn and Thrilling Discovery to get this interaction happening. Shriekhorn can mill cards every turn just to hope that you can get a Dredger in the graveyard. Thrilling Discovery is basically an extra 4 copies of Cathartic Reunion, gain some life, that's irrelevant. It's just all about discarding and drawing. And it should also be noted that some decks will also play Insolent Neonate or Burning Inquiry in the place of Thrilling Discovery, just because the white mana can sometimes stress the mana base a little bit. It's difficult to play because you're basically playing 4 colors. So removing white by playing these, they're less good, but it does make the mana base a little bit more stable, so you do see that from time to time. So how does the deck actually win? Well, it starts with Narcomoeba and Bloodghast. So Narcomoeba says it will enter the battlefield if it gets exiled from your library. So basically, if you dredge it, when you dredge, if you hit a Narcomoeba, you just get a free 1/1 flyer, and then Bloodghast will get returned to the battlefield every single time you play a land. So these creatures are small, but you can reanimate a huge pile of them as early as turn 2, right? Like turn 2, you play Cathartic Reunion, and you could potentially get 4 or 5 power from just these. But the deck also plays Prized Amalgam. It's a 3/3 that if it's in your graveyard and it sees another creature get reanimated, it tags along and gets reanimated with them. So let's say on turn 2, you Cathartic Reunion, and let's say you can manage to dredge 14 cards. If you're lucky, if you hit 2 Prized Amalgams and an Narcomoeba, that's 7 power on the board on turn 2. Again, these creatures don't look that big, right? For Modern, you get a 3/3 with no abilities, a 1/1 with flying, but the power is just this massive, large group of creatures that you can reanimate super early and super fast. And that's actually kind of modest. Dredge can sometimes just go off and generate a massive board of creatures in just 2 or 3 turns. And what makes this even better is how difficult it is to deal with these creatures. So if a Dredge player has a board full of Prized Amalgams and Bloodghast, even if you wipe the board, if you play a board sweeper, all the Dredge player has to do is play a single land that will bring back all the Bloodghast, and they will in turn bring back all their zombie friends. So the Dredge player can relentlessly attack into the opponent without fear of losing creatures because it's an undead army that constantly regenerates. Another way the deck often wins is with Life from the Loam. So this card may seem unassuming, but it actually wins games. Not only does it dredge, it's another dredger, and it's another way to get cards into your graveyard, but it returns a land from your graveyard to your hand. And remember, Dredge dumps most of its library into its graveyard, so you're going to have plenty of lands in your graveyard to return. Now, this is good for two reasons. First, it allows you to constantly reanimate your army with Bloodghast, right? Remember that life from the Loam has Dredge, so you can dredge it back to your hand. Then you can cast it to get 3 lands back, and that's basically 3 chances to fully reanimate your entire board. And after you cast Life from the Loam, it's in your graveyard with Dredge, so you can get 3 more cards in your graveyard and get it right back in hand. So you can do that over and over and over again and just return all your lands to your hand. Now, the second reason Life from the Loam is so good is it pairs well with Conflagrate. Now, once again, ignore the mana cost. Mana cost completely irrelevant. We're not looking to cast this from our hand. It's the flashback that we care about. You can discard X cards to deal X damage divided as you choose. So, Life from the Loam helps you fill your hand with lands that you can then discard to Conflagrate. Not to mention, your hand can get full of your dredgers, right? You're constantly dredging stuff back to your hand, and this is a discard outlet to just get all of those back in your graveyard and also blow up the board potentially, or just kill your opponent, because it can deal upwards of 7 damage. And remember, this is incredibly consistent because this deck dumps its library into its graveyard. You're casting all this stuff from your graveyard. You might think, like, what's the chances of getting Life from the Loam and Conflagrate? Most games you'll have it, because most games you'll get one of them in the graveyard and you can do this stuff. Another powerhouse in the deck is Creeping Chill. It drains for 3 and it can be cast for free if it gets milled. And Dredge can easily cast like 2 or 3 of these every game. It very easily mills through at least a couple of these most games, and that doesn't sound like much, right? But if you play against a Dredge player, you're basically starting at like 11 life or 14 life, and they're basically starting at 26 or 29, because even though yes, you're technically both starting at 20, you can almost guarantee that a Dredge player is going to hit at least a couple Creeping Chills, and they're free every game. And then lastly, many decks are also now playing Ox of Agony. It has Escape for 2 mana and can easily be cast as early as turn 3, plus it's just another threat that can constantly reanimate from the graveyard over and over and over again. Exiling 8 cards is nothing for this deck, so 2 mana, you get like a 5/3, you discard all your dredgers, and it's a big threat, and if the opponent kills it, then you just cast it again, so that's pretty good. But that's the general idea of Dredge, guys. It plays cards with Dredge to fill its graveyard. It plays ways to get them into the graveyard or to trigger them, and then it reanimates an army that just refuses to die. One last important note before we end this is Dredge is very vulnerable to Sideboard Hate. If you go right now and look at the metagame breakdown of Modern, Dredge can just as easily be one of the best decks or completely out of the metagame. And I mean that. I don't know when you're going to watch this. Maybe you're watching it right when I post it. Maybe you're watching it a year from now. It fluctuates like crazy because this deck is so susceptible to Sideboard Hate. In fact, I would actually discourage you from playing this deck if it's going to be the only deck you play. Because Dredge is a deck that, when no one is prepared for it, can absolutely dominate a tournament and win with ease. However, if everyone knows that Dredge is good, they pack their sideboard with Graveyard Hate, and then Dredge literally cannot win. And I can't stress this enough, Dredge cannot win if people are prepared for it. So if Dredge is your only deck and you're known as the guy at the local game store who plays Dredge, everyone's going to be prepared for it, and it's going to be very tough to just ever win. Dredge it just gets hated out of Modern very easily. However, what happens is it gets hated out of the metagame so hard, it just disappears. And people start feeling safe, right? Like, they don't play Dredge for a long time. So over time, people take their Graveyard Hate out of their sideboard, and then out of nowhere, Dredge flares up again. It tears through a Modern tournament. It leaves a wake of devastation and rot. You know, it completely obliterates the field. Nothing can stand up to Dredge. It's like the most powerful deck that anyone's ever seen. And then people are like, oh crap, I need Sideboard Hate against Dredge, and then it dies and disappears again. So don't build this for FNM. I don't recommend it. It's more of a like second or third deck that you build and have fun with from time to time, but not great in a like small group, because everyone's going to know that you play it, and they're going to be able to hit you out pretty hard. So yeah, guys, that's Dredge. One of the most powerful decks in Modern, or one of the most unplayable garbage decks in Modern, literally depending on what month it is. Go check the metagame page. Is it in the top or isn't it? It will change literally every couple of months. So that's Dredge, guys. Hopefully that was informative. Hopefully that was interesting. I don't know if I'm going to have a gameplay video or a budget guide for this. We'll see. But let me know if you're interested, I guess. And in the meantime, guys, thanks for watching. And I will see you in the next one.